I think companies of all sizes can benefit from Kubernetes. Like the line people like to use is, you are not Google. You don't have Google size problems. You don't need Google size solutions.
Welcome to Fork Around and Find Out, the podcast about building, running, and maintaining software and systems. This is an ad spot, but because we don't have a sponsor that paid for this spot, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who downloaded, listened, and shared these episodes with friends. Thank you especially to the people that rated the show on various podcatchers. We've been seeing the comments, we see the ratings, and we thank all of you. The podcast is already off to a great start. We've only put out a month of episodes, and it's already blown away all my expectations for how many downloads and people subscribing. If you want to reach these subscribers and you want to help this podcast to last long term, please consider sponsoring. You can find the sponsor packages at fafo.fm/sponsor, or you can send us an email at sponsor@fafo.fm. I know there's a lot of F's in that URL, but I promise you there's many, many more in the podcast itself. Thank you all for listening and keep that feedback coming. Welcome to Fork Around and Find Out, the most animated infrastructure podcast on the internet. I am Justin Garrison, and with me is Autumn Nash. And today's guest is Sam Rose. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Hey, thank you for having me.
I've been waiting for this episode because Sam's animation, fire. I love art and technical, and when that comes together, it makes me so happy.
And I want to get into that so bad, but I want to first talk to Sam about where you've been before, what you're doing now, because I did not know that you were doing this crazy, awesome animation and you're a backend engineer. You're just oh no, this is on the side. I don't know how to do JavaScript. I'm you just did a lot of JavaScript.
Yeah, this surprises a bunch of people. My background is almost entirely backend infrastructure, DevOpsy kind of thing. So I started my career way back in 2012.
Oh, I feel so old. Don't say way back. I feel so old.
I feel old now, and I'm getting gray bits in my beard. The tides are turning. But 2012, Ruby Shop doing Rails and stuff like that. Way back when I think Ruby was kind of hitting its peak, 2010.
It was very on brand. Yeah, 2012 Ruby Rails.
Everyone was doing it. Then Node.js came out of nowhere, and things kind of shifted. But back then, working for an ad company mostly, and then I went from there through an acquisition to another company I didn't stay long at. It was a bit of a, not hostile acquisition, but it wasn't very nice for everybody involved. I think it was fairly clear that we were required for technology, not for people. So over the course of a year, most of us left there. But then I ended up getting what I thought at the time was my dream job. So I worked at Google for 4 years. I joined as a site reliability engineer on the Android team, stayed in that for 2 years, and then did 2 years of software engineering on the Android Studio team afterwards. And at the time, this was probably a little bit after what people would call the golden years of Google. I think it had already begun a bit of a decline in public perception. But it was still an incredibly good place to work, and I learned a ton of things. I'd say probably the main thing I learned after the 4 years there was big companies aren't really my thing. I did the initial switch away from site reliability engineering to software engineering because I'd missed writing code a bit. As a site reliability engineer, at least on the team I was on, the things I was doing, not an enormous number of opportunities to get into code and write features that users will end up seeing. And I missed doing that.
What were you reliabilitying on Android as a site? Because that's a phone operating system.
The phone talks to a whole bunch of stuff. So at the time, the Android SRE team was split into two halves. So there was the Play SRE team, which took care of the Play Store and everything related to that. And then there was what was called the Cloud SRE team. And this is all ancient history now. These things have changed substantially. But we were responsible for the phone backup system, the authentication system, so the thing that maintains your Google login at all times. We were on call for the push notification system. I think by far the biggest thing we were on call for. We were on call for a couple of the device OTA system, the thing that told your phone it needs to update. A couple of the smaller things like that. Those are kind of the main hits. The two that I focused most of my time on was the backup system and the auth system. So the team, there were kind of 6 of us in London and then the 6 over in the US, and people kind of specialized on each of these services because these services It's Google. They're huge. Like they serve hundreds of thousands, if not millions of queries a second. And it's hard to specialize in all of them. So I took backup and auth. My main, I would say, like crowning achievement while I was there was taking both of those services from 2 nines to 4 nines of reliability through like lots of iterative change, working with dev teams, capacity planning, tweaking code paths to be more reliable, quite a lot of small nitty gritty things. So that's broadly what I was responsible for when I was at Google.
Now, I mean, usually going from 2 to 3 nines is like, we can just write some better software, right? But going from 3 to 4 is a lot bigger lifts and usually involves more process, right? Because it's like going from 4 to 5 is definitely like the people side of things. It's not necessarily your code is just amazing. It's we handle this better. But you said you weren't writing a lot of code. You said you wanted to get out of SRE because you weren't writing code.
So kind of user end, like end user features is stuff that I was kind of interested in, rather than like trawling through tons of logs to find some specific error that's caused by some race condition somewhere. Like that's fun, but it's not fun 6 months of the year. And it's kind of interesting going, there's like 4 nines to 5 nines is very challenging, but the fun thing for us there was that there was really no point in doing it because the telcos themselves were not 5 nines. So there was no point being more reliable than the network these phones were operating on. So we never saw 5 nines as a goal for most of the stuff on Android.
That's interesting that the phones weren't as reliable, so you had to almost kind of walk back how much you were expected to be reliable.
Yeah, it was nice. It was almost like a freeing thing that we had these kind of slightly lower reliability targets than some of the other core Google services.
And just being able to calculate that out of just like, oh, the thing I rely on is not reliable, so I'm not going to try to like beat it. And people often move to the cloud and they're like, I'm getting 5 nines. I'm like, the service you're using is 3. Good luck, right? Like this is not going to add up right.
I don't think people realize that there's different reliability for services versus like the cloud in general. Like I don't think people actually realize that. Can you explain what being an SRE like at Google was? Because I think like being an engineer on a release team and building a language is so different than the traditional SDE job. So I think like it would be interesting to hear what like your SRE job was versus being like doing software development, you know?
The SRE job at Google, as I experienced it, and it does differ between teams. So Google, for example, if you're working on some core service that everyone depends on, so say you're in like a networking SRE or something like that, your life is very different than if you're working on like product-based things, like Android was more of a product-based thing. But there's a lot of looking into the future. So a lot of kind of capacity planning, like can we service the expected growth over the next 6, 12, 24 months? There was quite a lot of communicating with development teams, say if something in our monitoring starts to look kind of strange or unexpected because maybe some release or something unexpected has happened, we'll kind of work with dev teams to help them understand how that was affected by changes they may have made. There was an aspect of you were encouraged to, how did they phrase it? Something like automate yourself out of a job every 18 months or something like that was one of the taglines they had. So it's like whatever you're doing now, there should be a percentage of your time dedicated to making sure you don't have to be doing that in 18 months' time. And in my experience, like that was more of a wishful kind of goal than something that happened regularly in practice. Some teams certainly achieved it occasionally, but I think most people were still doing the same stuff 24 months after that they were doing 18 months prior to that. It was a lot of almost babysitting, but I mean that like, I think that has some negative connotations associated with it, but it was like, there's got to be a better word for this here. Not championing, not like, you are the person like responsible for this being a reliable service, right? You are like the vanguard, you know, like anything getting in the way of the service being as reliable as it needs to be, it is on you.
And in a way you are babysitting though, because you're keeping it alive.
For sure. Yeah. Being on call is a big part of the job as well. So on call like roughly a third of the time, and nobody that I have worked for before or since does on call quite as well as Google does. Just in terms of sort of emotional well-being, I guess. So you're never on call 24/7. There's a limit to how much on call you can do within a given amount of time. You're always paid for on call, so it's a very fair system. Every so many hours of on call that you do, you get an hour of time off in lieu. So I would end up racking up something like 35 to 40 days worth of time off in lieu over the course of a year and just take big blocks of time.
Yeah, I'm out
time off, which is really nice. Yeah, it's like, I'll see you. And you have to be mindful of the team and what everyone else's responsibilities are. But you don't want to kind of put like unfair loads on subsets of people.
But you wouldn't be, you said not on call over 24 24/7. So is that like just waking hours? Like you're never on call when you're supposed to be asleep?
The way that we did it was in the UK, it was 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. during the week. So actually, no, the weekends as well. It's and then 4 hours of that 12-hour is what you're being paid for. You didn't get paid for time where you were in work. So during the week, you were getting 4 hours a day of time off in lieu time. It didn't directly correlate to 4 hours, but then the weekend was the full 12-hour block would count as paid time. So yeah, 12-hour shifts, and then you switch over to the US.
That's wildly fair compared to most big companies on call. And I almost think that it's like a buy-in, like on call sucks, but when you get the time off and paid and all of that, and you're not being on for 24/7, you'd probably have a better attitude towards your on call, but you also wouldn't be burnt out from on call. So you'd probably be a lot better at your job.
Completely agree. And then the atmosphere in site reliability engineering, really good. And I miss it a lot. I will be honest. I think people really cared for each other. People really cared about the workload you had, and they really cared about how much, because not all on-call shifts are born equal. Like, you could be dealing with a week of absolutely nothing, like nothing goes wrong, which would be great. It's rare, but it's great. Or you could be dealing with like the worst outage you've ever seen, right? And then maybe you had scheduled where you're covering somebody else's shift the week after that, and then you completely burn out, so you don't want to do that. People are generally really good at making sure everyone's okay. And the education aspect of being an SRE at Google, second to none. Like from anything I've experienced, there's so much material that's been produced to help you onboard as an SRE, and teams will have kind of personalized material for that team for, we care about these things. Here's the onboarding doc, here's some onboarding videos, if you want to, we can sit through it together and whiteboard it out and things like that. Really, really good. And I've not seen anything like it since.
Documentation and runbooks can make or break an on-call like shift, right? It's like, oh, if I don't have a runbook for this alert, like don't make me start from scratch. Like that is just so hard. And yeah, like, teams don't invest enough in that. One of the things that I remember from the SRE book, because SRE book came out like 2018, 2019, and you were probably there during this like.
I was there, yeah. I have my free copy of it.
One of the things that I always point out to people that are trying to start an SRE team is from the book, I say the thing that Google, at least from the outside in the books, did was they gave the SRE team power to say, we're not going to support your service. In the book, it says that like you are embedded on a product team. If the services are not reliable enough, SRE can pull out and say like, hey, you're on your own now. Dev team, go do your own thing. Is that how you experienced it? Is that actually whatever happened? It sounds like you were embedded full time with Android backups.
It is true that SRE gets quite a lot of autonomy in what they do and don't support. And I was involved in a fair number of what they call production readiness reviews. So you might imagine there's a much smaller number of SREs than can reasonably look after all of Google services. Google runs an incomprehensible number of services in production. And the time when I was there was like, a few thousand SREs globally. So it was kind of rationed out, I guess. Like you couldn't come to SRE and ask for support unless you had something that was a pretty critical service. And the process for being onboarded into an SRE team was this production readiness review where SREs would sit with you. You'd whiteboard the architecture, you'd talk about how it works. You kind of, as an SRE, you'd read through the code of the service. And generally speaking, Google services are fairly like homogeneous. There are accepted ways of writing applications such that roughly your way around anything that comes your way. I'm not sure how it is now. I'm imagining like my ex-colleagues at Google laughing at me now because things have really changed. But back in the days, it's kind of how it was. And it wasn't perfect. There were certainly edge cases and weirdness and, been on call for plenty of things that made no sense at the time. But the broad idea was there was a process you went through to get SRE support. And I did 2 or 3 of those while I was there. They're very intense. Like they take quite a long time. You end up iterating with the team that you're working with. Like it's not a yes, no process. It's usually it's almost like a car MOT where it's like these things need fixing before we'll support you. But if you do fix them and we'll work with you, then we will onboard you as a product we're on call for. I never experienced the pager going back the other way. So it's referred to as taking the pager and giving back the pager. So I've never seen the pager being given back. I'm not sure I like the threat of it, to be honest. I know some teams threatened it more than others as a way to kind of get teams to pay attention and do things that they want to prioritize. I didn't particularly like that practice. It felt way too adversarial to me. I think it's good to build up trust with the teams that you work with. One of the pain points on some of the products I was working on was they didn't get full-time dev support. So backup and auth at the time, there were long periods of time where they were considered, maintenance projects, and the devs were working on something new and exciting. So it was sometimes very difficult to get dev time and buy-in to work on stuff that needed it.
From reading the book, a lot of companies, the thing I saw that they did wrong was they're like, oh, look, we renamed our sysadmins to DevOps, and now we renamed them from DevOps to SRE. And I'm like, you didn't give them any power. You didn't give them any authority over what the devs were shipping, over the products, the services they were running. They were just on call for it. And it was just another wall between dev and ops. And the thing that I always pointed out to people when they're like, we're doing SRE now, I'm like, what power does SRE have? Can SRE say no? If they can't say no, it's not SRE. It's just sparkly DevOps. And that was always the point where I always push back on companies that were like, we have SRE now. I'm like, if you're doing this to pay them more money, fine. That you should pay them more money. They're on call, they're doing stuff. Or again, like give them trade-offs, right? Like give them some time off. At Disney Plus, like every on-call shift we had, we get a day off. So it's like we would rotate on Thursdays and we'd get Friday off. And it was just like part of our rotation. We're like, hey, you take Friday off if you were on call. And it's
I
like
was an engineer at the wrong company. This is yes.
In that time off, like it's not a complete, one-to-one sort of like we didn't track it as well as it sounds like you did. And we were on call overnights or whatever. But it was like, hey, if I'm on call, I know that I get the Friday off. I get a 3-day weekend. And that 3-day weekend is really helpful to get stuff done, to be able to go out and not carry my laptop with me and go do some stuff during the day or something. That stuff really does help.
Do you feel like you ever automated yourself out of having good documentation, or is Google really good at documentation? Because I think like sometimes when you're building infrastructure or kind of in the, I won't say SRE because I wasn't an SRE, but kind of like in the releasing or just kind of infrastructure and keeping everything up and going, automation is so heavily focused on that people forget to actually document it and teach others well. So like, do you think that with that push of automation, do you feel like they still balance it out really well with documentation?
There was a meme at the time, and I'm sure it still exists, where some documentation was referred to as strawberries. And it harked back to a photograph from one of the canteens at Google. I forget what it was now, but there was something labeled as strawberries and they weren't. It was like pears or oranges or something like that. So the meme was like, this documentation is a strawberry because, it's outdated now or things have changed. Google's not immune to these things. Like there's plenty of outdated documentation and there's plenty of situations where you'll be following some docs and something doesn't work because the world has shifted from under you. I'd say it's probably better than most companies I've worked at, but there was still, you probably wouldn't go like more than a couple of weeks without finding some bad documentation somewhere. But there really was time to fix it. Like it was considered important. And if you found outdated documentation and you said to your boss or your team, I'm going to take a day and I should really go over this and make sure it's right, then people generally didn't argue. So I think the culture around documentation was really good, but the actual documentation itself, sometimes not great.
I think that's kind of like as good as you're going to get, though, because the world literally does change underneath your feet, So I think that's actually like really cool to hear that they incentivized almost documentation and gave you the space to do it, because I think a lot of times when engineers are trying to get promoted or you come in new to the engineering role, there's no incentive to do the maintenance work or, fixing something that's important for security or documenting things. Like there are a lot of important jobs that we need to do outside of writing code, and none of those are incentivized. So trying to get people to like do like the hygiene of things is so hard because it's not incentivized towards promotion or getting leadership to look at you. But they're very important parts of being an engineer. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I agree. And at the time I was there was this attempt in like shift of mindset on what work counts towards promotion and how it's weighted. And the internal line was we need more of a focus on landing projects than launching projects. And I thought that was quite good. Like it's pithy and nice, and it evokes a good visual. I don't know like how well that went. I think I left shortly after that was a big thing and becoming a thing. I've talked to friends I have still there, probably a few years ago at this point, and I'm led to believe things have really shifted for the better in that direction. So I'm optimistic.
I think it's so rad that you did SRE and you were so like back end, deeply technical. But your blog just reads as the most warm and fuzzy thing that I've ever read. I felt like I almost got to know like a little bit just with like your little like one paragraph, and it's condensed in like 4 sentences. But it's like I just knew you were nice from this paragraph. Like I just felt warm and fuzzy from 4 sentences. And usually, like, I think we get this kind of like rep that engineers are like not warm and fuzzy and that they don't like people, but that's like the warmest, fuzziest thing I've ever read. I also don't like wasps, and I buy way too many more books than I can read. I was like, me and Sam are gonna be friends. Like,
No, thank you very much. I
also the buttons work on your like. Sorry, I had to fangirl over that.
type in moo, MOO.
Oh my gosh.
There's a whole bunch of Easter eggs in there.
Oh boy, that is absolutely ridiculous. Obviously, it's a terrible audio show. If you go to samwho.dev, Sam's websites, he has a little keyboard on the top, a little like 6-key keypad, and in the buttons you can hover over them, and then you can also click on them. And if you type MOO, I'm going to let you go to his website and figure out what happened.
This is the coolest personal website. Like, you do this in your spare time, dude? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, mine's is so ugly. Like, this is so nice.
Wait, before we dive into that completely, you went from SRE at Google, then you went to the Android team. It sounds like you're writing a lot of Java. Like in general, was this? Yeah, it sounds like a lot of Java here.
I'm a Java apologist, I think. I still think Java's a nice language, let down by a bad tool set. That's what I normally say.
Ooh, I like that take. That is like a mid take on Java. It's like, it's not really spicy. It's like, yeah, no, it sounds about right. All the other JVM type languages try to improve the tools more than the language, right? Like the Kotlins, the Scalas, the other things around it seem like the tool chains are better, or at least more opinionated. They're more Ruby on Rails.
Yeah, the tool chains get better. I think the languages do try and work around some of the shortcomings of Java. Like Kotlin, for example, is far more terse, and it's got this whole like coroutine focus that Java doesn't have.
Kotlin's like Java got jealous of Python. It was like, well, we're gonna do that too.
Okay, like, I was kind of let down by Kotlin, though. It's not that I don't like it, but I love Java and I love Python, right? And I felt like Kotlin was going to be like if Java and Python had a baby, and I got like readable, like easier Java, and I did not. I got a blob. Like, it's the structure is one of the best parts about Java, and I just felt like Kotlin, when you try to read like a big repository of Kotlin, it's just a blob.
I unfortunately have a biased opinion of Kotlin because I worked on the Kotlin support in Android Studio, and it was nightmarishly hard. Yeah, it was really challenging. So I have never used Kotlin in like a fun context where like I'm playing with it for the joy. It's always been, incremental compilation produces completely invalid bytecode. What am I going to do? It's unfortunate I can't have an unbiased opinion of it. But from what I saw, the goals looked pretty noble. I think at the time, at least anyway. I remember Java 8 coming out, and there was this like resurgence, I think, in the syntax of Java. Like I think Java 8 was the first time they really started to try and make the syntax into more modern. So I think they got lambdas for the first time, like actual like nice usable lambdas in Java 8, if I remember correctly. And then Java 9, they brought the module system in, which broke a whole bunch of stuff, but it was in service of trying to make things nicer. And since then, they seem to have really been putting a huge amount of effort into making it a much nicer language to use. And I think of a lot of people that tried Java back in like the 1.7 days, tried it now, they'd probably find it a lot more pleasant. I don't think it's got the same verbosity problems that it used to have. I think it probably is too OOP. Like, it would be nice if like bare functions were a thing and stuff like that. But broadly speaking, I think it's a very nice language. We need Charlie Marsh to come along and build UV for Java and just make everything nice.
And make the tooling better.
I think it's gotten better, but I think sometimes Java's very much part of like the old club of just like suffering, and people almost want to like, they feel like you have to suffer to hang.
The JVM is something I could say nasty things about. It's a remarkable piece of technology, but care and feeding of a JVM in a production environment, at least way back, it was really challenging.
From the ops SRE side, I hate JVM languages because of the JVM, right? It's just like, oh, I don't care how nice that language is to write. I hate managing it.
It's a heavy beast. It does a lot. It's nicer now with G1, like the G1 garbage collector. They, I think, made a good set of trade-offs with it, where there's way fewer knobs to tune. Tuning the concurrent mark and sweep garbage collector was very, very hard. It was much more of an art than a science. You had so many parameters to worry about, whereas they released G1. I think that G1 is still the default garbage collector, but you get essentially one parameter, and it is how long is the maximum pause your application can do. And you say like 200 milliseconds, and then it tunes everything around that for you. So it's a much nicer interface, much nicer to care for and look after in production.
I just don't know why they don't teach more about JVMs and garbage collectors in college, because I feel like they teach you how to code and use Java, but like none of the stuff that you need to know for production. I'm like, what's the point of paying $40,000?
I would love a like college level debugging course, right? Like I would get a whole degree, like give me GDB, give me strace, give me
how to
JVM
go look at logs and stuff, like, because that's like you pay like so much money and they're like, this is the fun parts, and that's like not even the stuff that you do every day majority of the time. Like nobody's writing a brand new application from scratch.
If anyone is listening to this and knows of a debugging course, I think that would be fantastic. And that is actually something that people have asked me to do some things on, like strace and various like tools. I was like, it's not a course. It's like, here's 10 videos on like these tools or something. But I would love that.
The closest I can think of is Brendan Gregg's book on debugging and stuff like that, which is really like, he's a whirlwind tour. Yeah.
I was a reviewer for his second edition, and let me tell you, like it was fantastic and way over my head in many ways. It was like the brand is just like I was like, I know how to do some debugging, and I don't know how I got roped into like, hey, we want to review this. I'm like, I would love to review this. I read the first one, and the second one, like I'm pointing things out, and then it was just like come back. It's like, no, you're wrong because of X, Y, and Z. I'm like, oh, you're right. Like I think of this in a different context or different use case. And yeah, those tools are very specific, and you have to know exactly how to use them in the right way.
Onboarding educational material will split into like, very generic stuff that applies to every SRE, then quite team specific stuff. One of the generic courses that I love the most, and I think like I've carried a lot from this into my life after Google, was a course given by a guy called Andrew Widdowson, and he did a how to reverse engineer a production service. So it was for people who, it's kind of often that you've got an SRE owned service that talks to a bunch of services that are not SRE owned. It's just like the nature of things that will eventually happen. And it's a dependent service that's causing you problems in some way. Like maybe it's not giving you the right responses back, or maybe it's fully down and you have to try and figure out why. So very often you'll be reverse engineering a service you've never seen before in your life. And it would just tell you, it's, where do you start? Like find the entry points, go and Google's got lots of like internal debugging tools that are not available to the public. So it's like a masterclass on using those as well. Really, really thoughtful and methodical. And I've taken a whole bunch of the lessons from it with me into the future. Like I always now look for entry points. Like that's the first thing I do. It's like, how does the code path get into this section that's not doing the right thing?
Did you go from Google to Budibase?
Oh, Budibase. No.
Budibase.
This is something else we could probably talk about that I have opinions on. I have a very fragmented career history. Like I'm one of these people that I think a lot of tech influencers would say I've just been that CV. He's worked at too many places. I did a little misadventure through fintech, and fintech just wasn't really my thing. I think I got into it for like quite idealistic reasons. I think ultimately day to day, you're not really helping users financially. Like I think there's I don't know, it's not that they're like doing like horrible, nefarious things, but it's not as focused on helping users succeed financially as what I wanted it to be. So I worked for a couple of banks in the UK, and then I came to Budibase after that. So Budibase is a low code app building platform, and it's self-hostable. So the idea is if you want to build internal tools, like you say, you want to like put a form in front of something, or you want to connect a couple of databases together and automate certain things in like almost like an IFTTT style way, like thing happens over here, trigger thing over there. Budibase has tools for doing all that stuff. So you spin it up in your own VPC, connect it to your internal databases without exposing anything to the internet. You can build forms, you can build applications, you can put graphs and stuff on it. It's got like a, not quite like drag and drop, but fairly close to like a WYSIWYG editor for patching things together and setting up triggers and stuff like that.
I'm just still getting over the if this then that reference, because I don't know how many of our listeners even know about, like, it's not a big thing anymore, right? Because like there's like the really old school like YouTube pipes folks that are like, oh, we did it first over here, and there's a few things in it, like if this and that I feel like had a very big moment in this, like, oh, look at all this cool stuff we did, and then things like Zapier and other things kind of came in, or like we do it more of them and we give you more flexibility. If this and that was very, I don't know, user friendly in a lot of ways.
It was very big. I remember everything in the UI was big.
It was very big buttons.
Yeah.
Back to Budibase, like you're doing backend there?
Mostly, yes. So we are entirely TypeScript. So TypeScript in the back end, TypeScript in the front end, Svelte in the front end. I mostly work on any of the kind of backend endpoints that the front end will talk to, and then also kind of care and feeding of our Kubernetes cluster.
What does TypeScript on the backend look like?
A lot like TypeScript on the front end. It's there are certainly some differences to be aware of, but broadly speaking, it's just TypeScript. It's nothing tremendously special.
I mean, the only times that I've really written TypeScript was for like the AWS CDK and for front ends. And so like those are like automation and then the front end stuff. Is this like, do you run it with NPM? Like, is this like a Node app that runs like a TypeScript?
Pretty much, yeah. It's runs just Node.js. You spin up some, we use Koa. Imagine kind of like Flask, I guess, in Python, where you can create endpoints and you can have middleware and things like that. And then you define all of your endpoints as just bare functions that take a request and return a response.
Is it as frustrating as Flask? Because I was so excited to be able to use Python to make like websites and web things. And then it just felt like beating your head against the wall over and over.
It's one of those technologies, I think, that it looks amazing on the homepage, right? Like, oh, look how easy it is to get an endpoint up and running. And then you spend more and more time with it and you realize, oh no, I need to start like moving things in separate files, and I need to start having middleware that attaches to everything. And no shade on Flask at all. I think Flask is fantastic, but I think it does get to a certain point where you start to have problems that you may not have initially anticipated having, and then you have to start to create solutions that wrap around things in Flask, and then you get to the point eventually it's like, damn, I should have used Django.
I love Python, and Flask is, I don't know, it's cool, but the more complex it gets, you're just like, but why?
Yeah, Flask is in that weird middle ground where it doesn't handle enough things. It's not quite Ruby on Rails, right? It's not very opinionated, but it's not low level enough like Django. And so you're like, oh, I want to do this weird escape. And like, yeah, you just got to go do your own thing.
I think it's the gluing it together part that is a pain. You have to make all these different like functions and then trying to make sure that it all works together. And then you put in the CSS and it's just, I don't know. I guess that's all front end and I'm just a back end person also, but
for me, it's the feeling that there is almost certainly a correct way the community has landed on for doing this, but it's not very exposed to me, and I have to either come up with it or go and read other people's code to figure it out.
You mentioned briefly there that the backend you're managing Kubernetes clusters. Yeah, it's a self-hosted thing, but you're like, here, go run it on Kubernetes.
So there's a cloud offering, right? So you can either self-host it if you want to, and I think most of our customers who are using it kind of commercially do that. And then if there is a cloud offering that if you just want to try it, or you have a use case where you don't really need to self-host it, then we can host it for you. So we have like a multi-tenant deployment of Budibase that runs in Kubernetes, and that's in EKS. So it's a reasonably like vanilla Kubernetes cluster. We're not doing anything tremendously fancy with it. It's just Budibase itself is a Helm. We have a Helm chart for Budibase that you can go and spin up in your own Kubernetes cluster. We just run that in our production Kubernetes cluster.
As someone who came from SRE at Google, not necessarily on the Borg team, but you had internal infrastructure, probably dealing with a little bit of Borg here and there, and then going on years later dealing with Kubernetes. What's the difference look like for you?
Using it's very different. So I remember how it felt to use Borg when I got to Google, and I'm in a very established team. Android's been there for a long time. There are ways of doing things already. Spinning up a new service, like scaling things up and down, releasing new config changes. These are all solved problems at this point. There are kind of push button solutions for all those things, or make a commit with very well-known, well-structured changes. I think I'm a Kubernetes apologist as well, I guess. I think it's very fun to hate on Kubernetes. People love doing it. I'm one of these people. I think Kubernetes is actually really, really good, and I like using it. I started using it actually, oh man, I forgot. I worked at Nebula between the fintech and the Budibase sections of my career. So Nebula, the video streaming platform, it was my first exposure to Kubernetes. So before I joined Nebula, I bought a couple of Kubernetes books. I'm like trying to eyeball them on my shelf, but I can't see them. So it's like Kubernetes best practices or something like that, or Kubernetes up and running, I think was one of them.
That was Kelsey's, first book.
Yeah, Kelsey's, yeah. I think he was your first guest in the
he was
the new name. Yeah, fantastic. Really great book. Like, I feel like had I not read that book, and I think a lot of the problems people that complain about Kubernetes might be having here is that they've not got the grounding in how you're meant to think about and use Kubernetes, like the importance of labels and selectors and things like that. It's a very unusual concept if you've not come across it before. I think people can get themselves tied in knots with it when they're not thinking about it correctly. It does the educational journey in the way that I like to do it as well, which is you start at the very basics and you build on top and you build on top until you get to realistic scenarios. Actually, I have a bare metal cluster running over in the corner there in a little server rack. So just like a few Raspberry Pis kind of wired together as a Kubernetes cluster. And I I've been kind of caring for that for the last like 6 or 7 years now. I keep it up to date. I run it as like a high availability cluster, even though it doesn't need to be. So I get the practice in doing those things. It's been really fun, a really good learning journey. All that kind of translates now to what I'm doing at Budibase. So we have an EKS cluster, lots of things managed for us and things like that. But generally, I think companies of all sizes can benefit from Kubernetes. Like the line people like to use is, you are not Google. You don't have Google-sized problems. You don't need Google-sized solutions. I think it's missing the point a little bit. I think Kubernetes has become this shared platform for deploying software, where if you read Kubernetes up and running, you spend the 3 or 4 days it might take of effort to read that and go through it and go through the examples. You can now benefit from a massive community of solutions on top of Kubernetes. Like, you get horizontal auto-scaling for free. You can use tools like Lens to get this like incredible dashboard into your cluster for essentially no effort whatsoever. There's so much stuff out there people have built. I think it is probably one of the highest velocity choices you can make early on in your startup journey.
I feel the same way about like Rails, right? Because people are like, oh, well, like, do you need Rails? Like, I don't know. What are you trying to do? It's like, it's a very opinionated tool set, but the benefit usually comes from the ecosystem, not the tool itself, right? And when I was at Amazon and ECS kept saying like, we're going to try to compete with Kubernetes, I'm like, no way, you're not. Like, don't build the Kubernetes features into ECS, and it doesn't matter if you have them or not, because you don't have the ecosystem. Right? Like, all of the tooling isn't there for ECS, it's there for Kubernetes, and you're not going to compete with the rest of the internet's building for this single platform that can be run anywhere. And I very much agree that like the benefits of Kubernetes is not necessarily in Kubernetes itself. It is in being able to learn and onboard people, being able to hire people that work on it and are experienced with it, and just say like, oh, you know how Kubernetes works. We might use it a little different. We don't like Helm charts, or we do some other like deployment, whatever. Like, there's a lot of things that people do that can be different, but to the basic fundamentals of it, like, oh, well, there's a controller, there's a CRD, there's some storage, whatever. Like, I can dig into it. It's like the first time that people were going from BSD to Linux, right? And they're like, oh, well, like this Linux is more of a standardized thing in the community, but this Unix thing is enterprise. It's the reliable thing. Like, everyone's going to do that. But then like the tools work different, and like the philosophies underneath on those operating systems were different. And the first time I logged into a BSD system, I'm like, I don't know anything that I'm doing. Like, none of this makes any sense to me anymore. Like, yeah, I'm in a terminal, but the commands don't do what I thought they would do. And just that like mindset of like, I know how this fundamentally should work, the philosophies behind it, even if it's used in the wrong ways, still helps me accelerate being able to be effective. You know, when you're driving down the freeway and you see one of those billboards that say your ad here? This is basically the audio version of that billboard. This is Justin Still. We are still looking for sponsors for this podcast. We are having a great time learning with everyone in the community about how infrastructure works, how people are adapting to problems, and even looking for solutions that solve some of those problems. We don't do pay-to-play episodes, but we do love to promote people in the ad spots so other people can learn about what you're doing. If you are a sponsor and you're looking to reach this audience of developers and engineers, go to fafo.fm/sponsor and check out our packages.
I think that's also like partially like when you get something in the open source community and it's well used like in multiple places, the more people use things, they're going to create open source projects to make their problems that they're having easier. And I think Kubernetes really benefits from that, like the whole community and the fact that people are using it at like Google, but they're also using it at multiple other companies. People are going to build, like they're going to write books, they're going to do documentation, they're going to build tools to use that. And that's kind of like hopefully why we continue to fund open source and, contribute to it, because it makes it so much better.
And sometimes people see the surface of Kubernetes, like this is so big, it's too complex. And I'm like, do you know the flags for curl? Have you looked at the curl man page lately? Like, that is a crazy complex tool that you have to know 10% of, right, to be effective. Like, you can do most of what you want with a little bit of that tool. Go to FFmpeg, right? Like this, I have to Google that every time. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing next, right? Let me find the incantation for FFmpeg. Those are incredibly complex tools that are also used at large companies, and they solve big problems. But I only need a little sliver of it, and you don't have to use the entire surface area to be effective with it.
I feel like most of the time you only use, like, even with like Linux, I think I've taken the Linux exam twice and you only use like 10 commands.
Go look at everyone's Git history. Like you can run the top commands and they're like 8 out of 10 are the same.
50% Git status over and over again. Yeah.
LS, CD, Git status. Yeah, pretty much.
So I have a degree in CS from the 6th worst university in the UK. It doesn't exist anymore. One of the things I love telling people. One of the assignments,
it's cool.
One of the assignments I got given was pass the man page of LS and find out every letter of the alphabet not used as a flag. And I can't remember what the answer is now, but it's very few. Like almost every single letter of the alphabet is used in LS.
That's a really good activity though, because then you have to figure out what is used. That's genius.
Once command lines have minus, like dash letter and also plus letter, like you're in some trouble, right? Like once you're like, I'm in the plus flags, this is a bad idea.
I'm pretty sure FFmpeg, that's just a programming language now. It's not flags.
I'm sure it's Turing complete and you could do whatever you want. When did you start doing animations? What got you into that?
Beginning of 2023. So I'd been blogging for a long time before that. I've written some moderately successful pieces here and there, featured in some newsletters and things like that. But broadly, I'd not been met with any success when I was blogging. It's still doing it mostly for me, mostly for solidifying the things that I had learnt. I find the process of writing really does highlight things you don't know, like things you thought you know and you don't know very, very quickly. So it's been something I've done for well over 10 years. And then I got really into the writing of, and I'm going to butcher his name, but Bartosz Chisnovsky, the guy who does the Mechanical Watch post. He recently released the post on moons. He does these incredible, usually like physics based. So he did the physics of bicycles and the GPS. And these are all beautiful 3D visualized. You can interact with every piece of it. He did once the Mechanical Watch one and the internal combustion engine ones. Like he's 3D modeled an entire mechanical watch and an entire internal combustion engine. And you can see these exploded views and all the parts are color coded. And I was immediately in love with this. I thought it was brilliant. I went through all of the combustion engine mechanical watch, his one on sound, his one on the moons one most recently. Just couldn't get enough of it. I thought the style was brilliant. And I thought to myself, what if that but programming? Like what if that but algorithms or data structures or whatever? And I thought to myself, I'm going to have a go. I know that I'm not going to get anywhere near to the quality that he's done. Like, in my opinion, I think he is probably the most impressive content creator in like the written form on the internet. And I don't think anyone comes close to him. He's so good at what he does. So yeah, I didn't want to do 3D. I didn't think I needed to do 3D, partly because I didn't think I could. I've not really done 3D visual programming before. 2D is way easier to reason about. And I still think this, it's not just a cop-out because I don't want to do 3D. I think you can probably visualize most computer science ideas in 2 dimensions, unless the things that are just explicitly 3 dimensions. So I'm sticking with it for the time being and getting better at it as I go. And you'll notice if you look at like a piece by Bartosz and a piece by me side by side, like it's almost plagiarism, like just the style.
It's inspiration.
Yeah, I guess, right? Good artists steal and all that stuff, but
except for DeepSeek, right? That's not a. I'm sorry.
We knew he was gonna throw shade in there somewhere. Like we knew.
Not allowed for some people, I guess.
I was listening to your episode with Crystal from was it last week? Just before this.
Yeah.
But no, like I very similar, similar use of colors, but I essentially took all the parts of his work that worked well for me, and I tried to apply them to something in computer science / programming. And I settled on load balancing for the first one. It's a topic I knew fairly well. I had a clear picture in my mind for how I would visualize it. And this is a recurring theme. I tend to think very visually about these things anyway. And I never go as far as saying I'm a visual learner, because some people get very upset with that. Some people are like, there's no such thing as visual learning.
Learner.
I feel like so
if
too.
you had to like taught all of my CS classes, I would be like even better of an engineer, because you're sitting here saying this other guy is like a better content creator, and I've never seen his work, so I can't like say, but like your visuals are beautiful. Like they speak to exactly how my brain works. And I think that the way that you did this is so rad, because there's so many kids that don't, like, I have very like neurodivergent children. I'm definitely neurospicy. And we go through our whole lives thinking that we're dumb or not as smart as other people. And then when you see the way that you've broken these things down, they speak so like heavily to my brain. And I just wonder like if more people discuss topics in this way, like how many other people would we be able to bring into different just career forms, you know, like people were like, well, math and engineering or they're so hard. And like, I remember I was in a parent class and it was for like helping your kids go to college. And this woman was like, oh, my son wants to go to school to be a developer. And he's like, and this guy comes in, he's like, I'm an engineer. And if he's not good at math and he doesn't get good grades, tell him not to do it. And I was like, bro, like, who are you? Like,
oh yeah, I'll go do that right now.
yeah,
Thank you.
you know what? Like, who are the nerve? And it cracks me because if you go on an engineering floor, we've all got like 6 different things of caffeine, and we're totally like all like just as neurospicy, you know. And I feel like if people learned how to kind of teach in the manner that you are, and I hope more people do it, and I'm really excited to find your stuff because it's like so many, like math is instructions, programming is instructions, right? And especially kids with neurospicy brains who want to know how everything works. It's amazing how their brains would actually be like amazing for this job, but it's just not being taught in the right way. And it's so exciting to see somebody teach in a way that will help other people get these complex or, you know, I guess dense information, but it's really not that dense. It's really a cool puzzle that you're figuring out, but it depends on who is giving you the information, and the way that you do it is just, it's so cool and impressive.
Thank you very much. Everything you said just like hit me in my soul. Like I completely agree. So I have neurodivergent kids as well. So I got 2 autistic little boys, and I think about this a lot. Like
Me too.
Oh, amazing! So I have a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I didn't know anything about autism before having my 2 diagnosed, and it's been a real journey. And I think I had an idea of what it meant, and now I'm kind of learning and going through it for real. It's very much not what I imagined it was, but I do worry a lot about education. So we send them both to a special needs school that's kind of specifically for autistic kids, and they're thriving. My own experience of education wasn't wonderful. I did good, I did okay, but I never really connected with it very well. And there was something when I read some of Bartosz's work, similar to you. I was like, this is how everything should be presented, at least to me. Like specifically me, I would love everything to be presented in this way. That'd be great. But I construct these things in my head anyway as I am learning. Like I'm learning about load balancers. I am in my head constructing this idea of like, okay, here's a set of 5 servers and it's round robining between them, and I can kind of see it happening.
Yes, I have a mental map of everything. I have to be able to, and I need so much information in the front part of learning something because I need to be able to build that.
Yeah, it's one of the most fun parts of the process is getting what's in here onto the screen in a way that's legible and can be built up from the very basics. And that's another thing I think is very important, and you'll see it kind of repeated throughout my work, is I try and start with the absolute simplest, most stripped down example possible.
This is going to seem personal, but do you think that your experience with your children has made you a better teacher and a better engineer? And I'm asking this question because it has been such a journey. I have 3 little boys. I have a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And getting my oldest the proper education like has been such a struggle, and we've had to switch schools, and I was like determined that he would never feel like he was dumb or bad at something, because I went through my whole life feeling like I wasn't like good at school or smart, even though I did well, but it like caused me so much anxiety because I had to like make myself focus, you know? So like learning, and then I just was like, I always knew I had ADHD, but I didn't know I had autism until like going through all the stuff with him, you know, because girls present in a different way. So just like learning how to teach him for his brain and learning how to break down concepts and kind of like learn more about how brains work, I feel like has made me a better engineer and problem solver. But it's like amazing to see the way that you break down all these problems. Do you think that influenced like how you teach, or like your empathy for how to break things down for people's brains?
I'm not sure. I've never thought about it. And I was thinking about it a little bit as you were talking. I'd say it's probably yes, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly how without thinking about it a bit more. I think it's certainly given me an appreciation for a wider variety of human experience, I suppose. Like early on when we had just gotten our youngest diagnosed, I remember reaching out to an autistic adult who had autistic kids to have a conversation, because we were wondering, is special needs school the right choice? Like, I think reasonable people can pitch it both ways. Like, do you want your child to feel different? Like, there's different ways of feeling different as well. So either you go to a mainstream school and then you feel different because you're different to the mainstream kids, or you go to a special needs school and then you're different because you're in a different school to the other kids. So I was confused about I didn't want my kids to get to like 15 or whatever and hate the decisions that I made for them when they were younger. Like, I wanted to try and make the best decisions that I could. And I thought that, the best way of doing that is talking to people who have been through this and getting their opinion. And I remember saying to him, I don't really know any autistic people. And he's like, yeah, you do.
Yeah, you know, but it's
certainly do.
amazing.
Yeah.
Like, now, like, all my friends are getting like themselves diagnosed, and we're like, dude, I was like attacked. I was filling out that form for my kid doing his diagnosis, and I was like, what do you mean? Like, I was like, do you mean this has been my whole life? And it's wild because my children are so different. My oldest goes to I guess you say it like a regular public school, but he is in like a extended resource room. But my two youngest are just in general ed, but the way that their neurospiciness manifests are completely different. One does great in school and like loses all of his, I don't know, containment at home because that's where he feels safe. And the other one is opposite and is totally chill, does his own thing and builds things in his room at home and absolutely hates school. Like, but it's wild how they can be in the same family and the same two parents, and they have completely different like manifestations of that. So it's like, it just has made me really appreciate how our brains work and how and it's so funny. Like, do you remember Justin Stanley from AWS, Justin? No. So like just you or him or like my friend, one of my favorite engineers at work, my friend Ben, y'all will talk about stuff that you did as children. Like Ben he built a Game Boy app thing or on like a calculator because his parents wouldn't let him have it. And Justin was saying how he built a rocket. And it's like these things that people used to say that little boys were getting in trouble, they were so smart. You know what I mean? They were problem solving. And if you look back, Einstein, Sebastian Bach, like Beethoven, so many of like the revolutionary people in history had autism. I brought my son like a whole stack of books of like people in history who had autism when he first got diagnosed. And it's like, if you look at the amount of people that were like just game changers and how we interact with music and engineering and so many things, it's just, and then you go and you work at a big tech company and so many, like, it's just so funny that we've been there the whole time and nobody knew.
Have you ever read the book Life Animated? It's about a parent who had an autistic kid, and I read that one while I was working at Disney Animation because it's a lot about how he loved 2D animation and he related all of his like feelings through the characters. And I remember I was audio booking that back and forth in my commutes to Disney, and I was a new parent at the time, and I'm just bawling like every day. I'm just sobbing, just like, this is like so hard to voice like how things are important to different people in different ways. And so I do recommend it, but just be prepared that it might cause some feelings.
Look, I'm like so tough, but when it comes to my kids, I'm warm and fuzzy and I'll like rip your whole, like I'm the mom that like will go up there and like they know me so well. Like I know everybody at the Department of Education. So like I will totally be like, even the Disney shorts make me cry. Like those are like my favorite.
Circling back a little bit on just education side of things in the animation, like you said you were sitting on this load balancing thing because you're like, I know how to represent this. I know how to visualize this. But then you had to like do it. I remember back in the like early 2000s, 90s, like the internet is multimedia. Like there was this huge, like, we are going to do like video and text. And it was like a big deal that you could do both. And I feel like in this case, like this represents what's possible on something on the internet, right? Like you can have animations right alongside the text and it's interactive and you can change how you're, interacting with it. And you've done 7 animations now. What would you have done different? What did you learn through this process? And what are you excited about doing next?
So I've open sourced all of the visualization code behind these posts. They live in a separate repo. So I publish them under an MIT license, and I very explicitly don't publish the words under an MIT license, just so I have something protected in it. But I'm very happy for people to use the visualization code, and people have done, which is really cool. If you go back and you look at the load balancing post though, so I think it it really highlights the kind of Luddite I was when I went into this, where it's all like raw JS. There's absolutely no like package management. I don't use anything from npm. I use a couple of like JS CDN links for like Plotly and things like that, but it's put together like someone that has no idea what they're doing. And the reason is that I really didn't. And I ended up using Pixie.js, which is it pitched itself as like an HTML5 game making library. So it's a lot of resources for drawing to canvases and doing animations and things like that, handling input. It seemed pretty good for my needs at the time. I don't use it anymore because it's fairly heavy. So it includes everything you'd need to make a game. You know, you've got like audio and video handling stuff in there. You've got input handling, lots of different things like shaders and stuff like that I don't use and don't need. So it was pretty heavy. So I think it comes to like over half a meg, I think, possibly even more. Then Plotly was like a megabyte of JS. And I spoke to Scott Hansen on his podcast, and he was going through the network requests on my page. He's like, that's like over a megabyte you've loaded there. And I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to.
Scott calling you out.
Yeah, just getting shredded by Scott. The moral of the story is I didn't know what I was doing. I learned everything I needed to know to do some 2D animations that kind of worked well enough on the page. And I think there's actually some devices it doesn't work well enough on, because I didn't realize, for example, when you draw to a canvas, I was using WebGL, you can only have so many WebGL contexts on one page, and the context is the thing that you draw to the canvas through. It's the thing you issue commands to. And you can only have, on some devices, like 8 of these things at any one time. So I think on some of my devices, as you scroll down, some of the things just don't load. But it's like reasonably old mobile devices, and I haven't gone back and fixed it. It works fine on modern phones, modern browsers, and things like that. So I thought it was probably... I didn't want to touch it because it's terrible. Honestly, if you go back and you look at the code, you really will think I'm absolutely unable to do front-end development.
Sam, I don't see any of the stuff that you see. Like, I was geeking out about your load balancing one, and like the animation seems so full even though it's 2D. That's the first one I clicked on, and I thought that was your most recent blog. And then I went through the other ones. So like I totally like, I think that you have like the artist, you know, like when you're an artist and you look at the things that you do, you see all the problems in it, but we don't actually see the problems in it, because I didn't see that at all. Like all the things you just described, I did not see any of that when I looked at it. I thought that was like, it's such a full concept for 2D, and like I thought that was such an awesome way to present it, and I didn't see any of the problems that you just stated.
I think it's a blessing and a curse. I think I care very deeply about the quality of these things. And for example, if you open the load balancing post on mobile and you rotate the screen, none of the visualizations will adapt to the new screen size. And it kills me that doesn't work. And you'll notice all my later ones that does work, because I was so like ashamed of myself for not making it work in the load balancing one. I like what you said about art. I'm very flattered. I want to lean into that way more, actually, thinking about it. So if you were to open the Turing Machines post, for example, something I did for that one that I wasn't sure about at the time. So I drew the hero image in that post by hand. So like it was done in Procreate on my iPad over the course of several evenings. I wouldn't say I'm a good artist. I think it is enough his likeness that it works well as a hero image. Some mean people on Hacker News did say some stuff about it. I think someone was like, he looks like a weird alien. You should just stick to Shutterstock next time or something. And I was like, ow.
I will. Can you tag me wherever that is, and I will beat it up for you. Like the lies you tell, like you are definitely an artist, and those people are just jelly. And also, like, I am willing to fight on the internet for you. Like, just tag me in. Tag me in. I have time.
I replied to it saying, it's a little bit of an anti-AI statement, a little bit, as more and more people are using AI tools to generate worse and worse content. Unfortunately, I want my content to really stand out as kind of a human, really organic and thought about and cared about. So I tried this new idea of hand drawing a hero image, and I probably will do it again, I suppose. My wife is actually a significantly better artist than I am. If you scroll down to the bottom of the Turing Machine page, there's 3 drawings at the bottom, and she did those, and I think they look so much better than mine. I hadn't told her about my plan to draw the hero image, and it was like quite late into the process. She was like, oh wow, what are you drawing? And I was like, oh, I'm drawing Alan Turing for my post. And then she was like, oh, I'll have a go as well. And she drew a picture of him. It's way better than mine. I'm like, God damn it. I'm still going to use mine because it feels kind of cheeky to use yours, but I want to lean more into that. I would like, and I've not said this to anyone before, I would love if every single one of my posts, I worked with an artist and I kind of paid them to create artwork for the page. So I'm writing a post at the moment, very early stages on multi-layer perceptrons. So very early kind of classifier neural networks. And I would love to commission an artist to do kind of their own style. So the important thing behind this is it would be their style. Artificial neurons, like actual pictures of neurons from the brain and things like that. Just artistic stuff around the writing. And then, feature them as an artist that has done the artwork. And then for every post, I get somebody else and it's in their style. So every post has this unique feeling to it. And at the same time, using my modest platform to try and boost like other artist profiles. I have previously put out like, oh, hey, I want to commission some artwork, this kind of thing. And the problem is you just get hundreds of DMs from scammers and people that are not legitimate and people that are looking to rip you off. So I don't know the best way to approach artists. And I would love advice if you have any, because I think it would be so cool.
I'm so glad that you don't want to use Fiverr, because like they just down level and just are terrible, and they've ruined so much of graphic design and animation and so many like other parts that like I love that you actually want to work with them. It's not that you're getting a bunch of scammers though, but I just think that's such a like rad idea to do that and to really.
Sure, there's a way. I think it would probably have to be through my own network of people, like asking friends and stuff.
Even networking on social media on like Blue Sky, but like networking with other artists, because there's like an artist feed too.
Well, one of the things that I've found is just like finding the right style and experience from an artist is really, really difficult, where it's like there's a bunch of amazing artists out there that just aren't the thing I'm looking for. And that's like, cause like the vibe and the things that I've tried to do different animation projects in the past that were mostly just like 2D hand-drawn animation things. And every time it's like, oh, like it's not a comic book. I don't want that vibe. It's not a dark sort of like, it's like I want the specific thing, and I don't know how to tell someone that. I don't have necessarily the words to be able to say, like, I have to go look through a bunch of it and then do the work to say like, oh, these are the 5 that I think look about right. I'm sure there's plenty of artists that can do different styles, and maybe they just don't show that. And it's hard to like.
Have you ever tried just looking up a video or grabbing a book and looking at the different styles? It might be like, like a book of just different styles. Then that way you can kind of get the vocabulary that you're looking for. Or even if you just Google different animation styles.
Yeah. And I mean, but like, again, art and animation, there's a lot of people that are desperate for work right now. And it is also really hard because you will get hundreds of people that even if you say, I want this specific thing, they're still going to come to you and kind of waste your time and say like, oh, here's all this stuff that I did. I'm like, that's not what I asked for at all. There was a lot of people that was just like, oh, you know what? Like, you're great, but it's not what I was asking for. And thanks. And I stopped asking publicly for help for those things because of the amount of time it was taking me to like filter out all the people and then say like, okay, well, like, what's your timeline look like? What's the price? And it just never aligned up.
The funny story about how I originally had this idea is, do you know who Andy Matuszak is? Mm-mm. He is an education researcher. Fantastic. I'll link him for the show notes after this. His website is beautiful. He's obviously put a lot of time into it. And I read a post by him with the title "Why Books Don't Work," like a fairly incendiary title. But the point is that it's unrealistic to expect people to read a book and then know everything in the book. Like, it's, we have so many more tools now. And it was just speaking to me. I was like, I completely agree. Like, it's a big part of what I'm doing at the moment. And then I clicked on some of his other posts, and every post I opened like had a different theme to it. And I was like, is he making like a bespoke theme for every single post? That's an amazing idea. And then I had this idea, I'd love to like commission different artists to do work in their style for each of my posts. But it turned out actually every single link was guest posts on other websites. So he wasn't actually doing that. So he's given me this idea, even though he's never actually done it.
That's cool, but it also just seems like it would be very time consuming, but that's pretty cool that he also like is giving people like a platform, but at the same time.
So Sam, what do you think is next? What's the next, you said you're working on like a neural network sort of post.
What has been occupying a lot of my time recently is, can I do this full time is the question on my mind. I don't think I can do the blog posts full time. I think, so I did recently land my first sponsor, which is a huge step for me. Very, very grateful. So the company approached me and we spoke and came to a good agreement, but it's not like, it's not the kind of money that I could live off, but it's, very, very generous for the work it is. So I'm thinking to myself, like, how would I how would I do this full time if I really wanted to? And I'm beginning to kind of take steps in that direction, which is why I've not made a lot of progress on my next post yet. I've got some visual stuff working, but I haven't got everything that I need because I'm just doing a lot of logistical stuff. Like I created a company and I speaking to accountants and things like that, all the stuff that goes around it. And you mentioned, I think earlier on, oh, you're doing this in your spare time. That's incredible. So I do 4 days at work, and then I'd have Fridays for working for my own company. So it's not quite spare time. Like I have been able to carve out real time for it now, which I'm incredibly grateful for. But yeah, it's what's next. I want to keep making the posts. I want to keep a cadence of like 2 or 3 a year. And I think with the sponsorship and with the extra time, that should be possible into the foreseeable future. But I'm also thinking about other ideas surrounding that. Like writing these blog posts is one way of reaching a wide audience with educational content, but there's lots of other things out there. Like everybody at the moment is making courses, and very inspired by the work of people like Aaron Francis and Josh Camo and the stuff that like Matt Pocock is doing through badass.dev and things like that, and starting to wonder, is there space in that market anywhere for the skills that I have? And I think there probably is. And I've not fully fleshed out my ideas in that space yet, but it would surprise me if in the next 3 years I didn't do something in that space. And then also the most unlikely thing, I can't remember who I was talking to recently, but having this conversation about physical products and talking about the question, like, what if you could hold an algorithm? What if you could physically hold an algorithm? Like, how would that look? How would it work? And it came about, I have a friend who's got a 3D printer, and I was like, could you 3D print a Turing machine? Like, how would that work? How would that look? And we started looking at, there are physical example of Turing machines out there that you turn a handle and it does some sort of program, and it works in the same way a Turing machine does. They're real complex, actually, like probably way more complex than we could achieve realistically with a 3D printer. And plus, I wouldn't want to sell 3D printed products. Like a lot of thought has also recently been put into like, what is my brand, so to speak, my personal brand. And I really want to lean heavily into like quite high quality things. So if I did produce something like this, in my head, it would be a fully like metal Turing machine that has a weight to it and it feels good. And like I'm thinking like a desk toy kind of accessory thing. So I think those are the least likely. Dealing with physical products has a whole bunch of challenges that I know nothing about. But I do love the idea of like, what if you could hold a bubble sort? Like, how would that look? How would it work? So kind of physical manifestations of algorithms is something that's on my mind.
That's such an interesting concept. I hope you don't let all the hurdles stop you, because that would be such a cool concept.
The biggest hurdle right now, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this, I'm so time poor with the kids and with the full-time work. I haven't mentioned it, but I'm also a trustee for a charity in the local area that works with special needs kids. Time is like unbelievably precious.
Sam, do we have the same life? I think we have the same life.
Have you seen us in the same room? I don't think I have.
It's like you never see Batman and like, what's his name? Batman and Bruce Wayne at the same time. I think we're the same person.
Which one of you is Batman? I'm just trying.
Sam, definitely Sam.
Sam, thank you so much for coming on the show and explaining to us just your career and all the things you've been through, but then also the things you're looking forward to and the animations. And everyone should go to samwho.dev because those animations are fantastic. You'll learn a lot of things that even things you didn't really realize you didn't know. Right? There's a lot of things that just got exposed once you put a visualization to some of this stuff, and I think it's fantastic. So
I hope you have a just long career in creative teaching, because you are, for one, a rad human on your own, but like the fact that this is so creative, and I hope it's the future of how we teach people things.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been a blast talking to you both. I
know you are semi-active on Blue Sky. I don't know if you're on other social networks or not. We do have the FAFO.FM Blue Sky account has a starter pack of guests, and you're in there already. We have a couple people in there, so it's been fun. We've been just adding them as we're going. We're always a little ahead on it too. So anyone that's on Blue Sky, if you are looking for some of the past guests or whatever show you're listening to, check out the FAFO.FM accounts, and there's a starter pack there that you can find anyone that has a Blue Sky is in.
One more thing. What you said about websites having downtime and how like multiplayer games, that's so real. Like, it's so true. Like, you can't have like 5 seconds of downtime on a website, but Fortnite will like crash itself for like 8 hours and tell you to come back, and then your kids are sitting there at like 3 p.m. Like, they just I swear to God, you're just like, the way that they will wait for the next like what is it called? Episode or whatever, and they get the new downloads, and just it's amazing. Like they could just leave up a version of like the old game, but they will completely take it down for 8 hours, and kids will sit there and wait. It's like you can tell all the kids in the neighborhood are outside because Fortnite's down.
Yeah, that's the thing. You go outside, it's fine. It's the thing that triggered it was like major database upgrades. They'd be so much easier if I could just take the website down for an hour, do it, and bring it back up, rather than have to set up a logical replica. Yeah, much faster, much cheaper in general. There's this weird obsession with 100% uptime that I don't think is well placed.
Yeah, because like there's a lot of websites that we do not need 100% of the time. Also, the IRS website was down for like 3 days last year when we were trying to make like the business.
That's right.
For this. So like, dude, nothing worked for 3, and it was even out, and it was like longer than the structured downtime. It started 24 hours early, and it was out longer. And I was like, this is actually important. Like.
And things are okay, right? Like it's not like obviously some things probably weren't okay, but generally speaking, like we're all still here, and you know.
One last thing, because this episode's going out at the end of February. In the first week of March, March 6th through 9th, Autumn and I will both be at the Southern California Linux Expo. So if anyone's listening to this, wants to come to Scale, it is in Pasadena, which traditionally has had fantastic weather. I know in January, there have been a lot of fires around the area. But as far as I know, March is still going to be great weather to attend. It's a community event. I help run the Cloud Native Day. Autumn, you have a talk there.
Y'all, Scale is going to be absolutely bananas. Like, have you seen the list of people going? Like,
there's some great people.
It is going to be like not just nerd summer camp. Like, it is going to be unhinged nerd summer camp. Like.
And it's community run. So if you are individual, if you have education or like half price tickets, bring your kids. I'm bringing mine on Saturday. Autumn, I know you're coming with yours.
If you see a horde of children that are just like absolutely ridiculous, it's probably like me and Justin's kids, but like mostly mine. Like
there are game nights on Saturdays, so feel free, please come. It's community run events. It is affordable for a lot of people. I think the full price tickets are like $120 or something like that. So, and there is sponsorships for some of that if you need it. But there's a lot of different tracks, a lot of different tech. It is a very fun enterprise, non-single vendor sort of environment to be in.
You're doing the best sales pitch. That's like the best, like
I've been going
like
for
wholesome one, and I'm just
years.
like, I'm gonna do hood rat stuff with my friends, and then like my kids are going to like, you're just gonna see 5 little boys like running around with like stickers on their heads and stuff, and like Scale shirts and like Raspberry Pis and stuff, and like
this is Scale 22. I think the first one I went to was Scale 7 or 8 maybe.
Do you think they'll like I can get banned for my kids? Like, do you think they'll just be like, don't come back with those little like
I have, if anyone's watching the show, like, well, no one's watching it now, but we might have clips. I have a bunch of Raspberry Pis that were given away for the kids for the next generation track is by kids for kids. My son gave a talk a few years ago, but there's kids in the audience and they have like a STEM room and stuff like that. But people in the community donated a bunch of Raspberry Pis. Thank you so much for sending them. I have been setting them up, 3D printing cases, making sure they work, getting them ready to hand out at the event. So we will have a couple like scavenger hunt type things that you can get a free Raspberry Pi if you come. So there's a lot of cool stuff. So please check it out. We'll have the link in the show notes. And Sam, thank you again for coming.
No, thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Fork Around and Find Out. If you like this show, please consider sharing it with a friend, a coworker, a family member, or even an enemy. However we get the word out about this show helps it to become sustainable for the long term. If you want to sponsor this show, please go to fafo.fm/sponsor and reach out to us there about what you're interested in sponsoring and how we can help. We hope your systems stay available and your pagers stay quiet. We'll see you again next time.